You think the world operates on fairness. You believe that being a good person guarantees good outcomes. You've been taught that honesty and kindness will eventually be rewarded. But here's the brutal truth nobody wants to tell you. The world doesn't care about your moral compass. It never has, and it never will. Right now, someone is getting promoted over you because they played the game better, not because they worked harder. Someone is winning deals, building relationships, and accumulating power while you're sitting there wondering why your genuine efforts go unnoticed. The harsh reality is that while you're playing checkers with your heart on your sleeve, they're playing chess with their cards held close to their chest. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago when he wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." He wasn't celebrating cruelty. He was revealing the operating system of human nature. He was showing us that power isn't given to the deserving. It's taken by those who understand the rules of the game. You've been lied to about how the world works. You've been fed fairy tales about karma and justice while the people around you use psychological principles you don't even know exist. They're leveraging human nature while you're hoping human nature will be in your favor. They're studying the game while you're still pretending the game doesn't exist. Every day you wait for the world to recognize your worth is another day someone else is building the life you want. Every moment you spend being authentic and transparent is another moment someone else is being strategic and mysterious. Every second you waste hoping people will treat you fairly is another second someone else is learning to make fairness irrelevant. But today, that changes. Today you stop being the victim of other people's psychological strategies and start becoming the architect of your own power. Today you learn the 7 ruthless lessons that separate the influential from the influenced, the powerful from the powerless, the untouchable from the expendable. These aren't nice lessons. They're not feel-good principles that make you comfortable. These are the dark truths that make you dangerous. These are the psychological weapons that turn you from someone who hopes for respect into someone who commands it. These are the Machiavellian insights that transform you from a player in other people's games into the person who sets the rules. Lesson 1. Calculated Mystery Watch. How the most powerful people in any room communicate. They don't talk anymore. They talk less. They don't reveal more. They reveal less. They don't try to impress with their knowledge. They impress with their restraint. This isn't accidental. This is a calculated mystery, and it's the first weapon in your psychological arsenal. You've been doing it wrong your entire life. You walk into conversations trying to prove your worth through words. You share your thoughts, your plans, your struggles, thinking that transparency builds trust. You reveal your strategies, your weaknesses, your next moves, believing that honesty creates connection. But here's what actually happens. Every word you speak is data someone else can use against you. Think about the last time someone shared too much with you. How did you feel about them afterward? Did you respect them more? Or did you unconsciously file away their vulnerabilities for future reference? Did their openness make them seem powerful? Or did it make them seem desperate for approval? The uncomfortable truth is that oversharing doesn't create intimacy. It creates leverage for other people. Machiavelli wrote, "The lion cannot protect itself from traps, and the fox cannot defend itself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. The fox knows that information is power, and giving away information is giving away power. The fox understands that mystery creates intrigue and intrigue creates influence. But you're thinking like prey, not like a predator. You're thinking that if people know everything about you, they'll like you more. The reality is the opposite. When people know everything about you, they respect you less. When they can predict your reactions, they can manipulate your responses. When they understand your motivations, they can exploit your desires. Here's how the calculated mystery actually works in the real world. You're in a business meeting and someone asks about your strategy. Instead of explaining your entire plan, you say, "I'm exploring a few different approaches. I'll know more next week." You've revealed nothing useful while appearing thoughtful and strategic. You've created curiosity without creating vulnerability. You're at a social gathering and someone asks about your relationship status. Instead of explaining your dating life, your past relationships, and your future hopes, you smile and say, "I'm focused on some interesting projects right now." You've maintained privacy while projecting confidence. You've avoided giving anyone ammunition to use against you later. You're negotiating a salary and they ask about your other opportunities. Instead of revealing whether you have other offers, you say, "I'm talking to a few companies, but this role is particularly interesting to me." You've created the impression of demand without revealing your actual position. You've maintained leverage while showing interest. The psychology behind this is simple but profound. When people can't figure you out completely, their brains stay engaged. When they know everything about you, their brains check out. Uncertainty creates attention. Predictability creates boredom. Mystery makes you memorable. Transparency makes you forgettable. But calculated mystery isn't about being secretive for the sake of being secretive. It's about being strategic with your information. It's about understanding that every piece of data you share shifts the power dynamic. It's about recognizing that people value what they have to work for more than what's freely given. You reveal your victories gradually, not all at once. You share your struggles selectively, not with everyone. You discuss your plans strategically, not completely. You become someone people want to understand instead of someone people think they already know. You transform from an open book into a fascinating puzzle. This doesn't mean you become fake or manipulative. It means you become selective. It means you understand that authenticity doesn't require total transparency. It means you recognize that being genuine doesn't mean being an emotional exhibitionist. You can be real without being revealing. You can be honest without being an information vending machine. The people who hold power understand this instinctively. They speak in measured words. They pause before answering. They never feel compelled to fill every silence with unnecessary information. They let other people wonder, speculate, and stay engaged. They use curiosity as a magnetic force that draws people toward them, instead of pushing people away with too much information. Start practicing this immediately. In your next conversation, resist the urge to explain everything. Share the outcome, not the entire process. Mention the result, not every step that led to it. Let people wonder how you accomplished something instead of giving them a detailed breakdown they didn't ask for. Watch how their respect for you increases when they have to work to understand you. The world is full of people who overshare and wonder why they're undervalued. Don't be one of them. Be the person who says just enough to create intrigue and not enough to eliminate mystery. Be the person others want to figure out instead of the person others think they already understand. Be calculated with your revelations and watch how calculated mystery transforms you into someone untouchable. Lesson 2. Adaptive masks. You think authenticity means being the same person in every situation. You believe that changing how you present yourself is somehow dishonest or manipulative. You've been told to just be yourself as if there's only one version of yourself worth being. But here's the truth that nobody wants to admit. The people who win in life aren't the most authentic. They're the most adaptive. Right now, you're limiting your influence because you're trying to be one consistent person across every context. You're bringing the same energy to a board meeting that you bring to a coffee shop. You're using the same communication style with your boss that you use with your friends. You're presenting the same version of yourself to everyone you meet, wondering why some people connect with you and others don't. The brutal reality is that different situations require different versions of you. Different people respond to different energies. Different environments reward different behaviors. The most successful people understand this and they adapt accordingly. They don't lose themselves in the process. They reveal different aspects of themselves depending on what the situation demands. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote, "A prudent man should always follow in the path trodden by great men and imitate those who are most excellent, so that if he does not attain to their greatness, at any rate he will get some tinge of it." The great men he studied weren't great because they were consistently themselves. They were great because they were consistently strategic about which version of themselves to present. Think about water. Water adapts to every container without losing its essential nature. Water becomes ice in freezing temperatures and steam in hot environments, but it never stops being water. This is the principle of adaptive masks. You maintain your core identity while adjusting your presentation to fit the environment. You become more effective by becoming more flexible. But you're afraid of being called fake. You're worried that changing your approach means compromising your integrity. You think that adapting to different people means losing yourself in the process. This fear is keeping you weak. This thinking is keeping you limited. This belief is keeping you from accessing the full range of your potential. Here's how adaptive masks work in practice. You're meeting with conservative investors, so you emphasize stability, tradition, and proven strategies. You're not lying about who you are. You're highlighting the aspects of your personality and experience that resonate with their values. You're speaking their language without abandoning your own voice. You're networking at a creative industry event, so you emphasize innovation, creativity, and forward-thinking approaches. Again, you're not being dishonest. You're featuring the parts of your background and thinking that align with their priorities. You're adapting your message to your audience without changing your core message. You're in a negotiation with data-driven decision-makers, so you lead with facts, statistics, and logical arguments. You're not pretending to be someone you're not. You're presenting information in the format that will be most persuasive to them. You're using their preferred decision-making language to communicate your position. The psychology behind this is fundamental to human influence. People connect with people who seem similar to them. People trust people who understand their perspective. People are influenced by people who speak their emotional and intellectual language. When you adapt your presentation to match their preferences, you increase your chances of successful communication. But this goes deeper than just changing your communication style. This is about understanding that you contain multitudes. You have different facets of your personality that can be emphasized or de-emphasized depending on the situation. You have various skills and experiences that can be highlighted or downplayed based on relevance. You have multiple aspects of your background that can be featured or minimized according to context. You're not being fake when you emphasize your analytical side in a business meeting and your creative side at an art gallery. You're being strategic. You're not being dishonest when you highlight your leadership experience with one group and your collaborative skills with another. You're being effective. You're not being manipulative when you adjust your energy level to match the environment. You're being socially intelligent. The most powerful people master this skill early. They study their audience before every interaction. They consider what version of themselves will be most effective in each situation. They think about which aspects of their background will be most relevant to each conversation. They don't walk into every room with the same presentation. They customize their approach based on their objectives and their audience. This requires you to develop self-awareness about your different qualities and skills. You need to understand your range so you can choose which part of your range to display. You need to recognize your various strengths so you can feature the most relevant ones. You need to acknowledge your different interests so you can connect on the most appropriate level. Start mapping out your different adaptive masks right now. What version of yourself is most effective in professional settings? What aspects of your personality work best in social situations? Which of your skills are most relevant to different types of conversations? How can you adjust your energy and presentation to match different environments without compromising your integrity? The goal isn't to become a chameleon with no authentic core. The goal is to become strategically flexible while remaining fundamentally consistent. The goal is to maximize your influence by optimizing your presentation. The goal is to connect more effectively by communicating more intelligently. People who refuse to adapt their approach wonder why they struggle to connect across different contexts. People who insist on being the same in every situation limit their potential in most situations. People who think adaptability is dishonesty stay stuck in narrow circles of influence. Don't be one of them. Develop your adaptive masks. Learn to read the room and adjust accordingly. Master the art of strategic presentation without losing your essential self. Become someone who can succeed in any environment by understanding what each environment rewards. Transform from someone who hopes for acceptance into someone who engineers connections. This is how you become untouchable across every context you enter. Lesson 3. Detachment. Power. You're addicted to outcomes you can't control. You're emotionally invested in other people's opinions, decisions, and reactions. You're giving your geezer power away to circumstances, relationships, and results that exist completely outside your influence. This emotional attachment is the chain that keeps you weak, desperate, and manipulable. But when you break free from attachment, you break free from control. Every day, you make decisions based on fear. Fear of losing someone. Fear of missing out. Fear of being rejected. Fear of failing. Fear of being alone. These fears control your choices, and when your choices are controlled by fear, your life is controlled by external circumstances. You become a puppet dancing to other people's music instead of being the conductor of your own orchestra. Right now, Someone is controlling you through your attachments. Your boss controls you through your attachment to your job. Your romantic partner controls you through your attachment to the relationship. Your friends control you through your attachment to their approval. Your family controls you through your attachment to their acceptance. These attachments have turned you into a hostage in your own life. Machiavelli wrote, "He who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner affects his ruin than his preservation." What ought to be done is often prevented by our attachment to what we hope will happen. What needs to happen is frequently blocked by our fear of what might happen. Detachment isn't about not caring. It's about caring without being controlled by your caring. But you think detachment means becoming cold, emotionless, or disconnected. You believe that not being attached means not being invested. You worry that letting go of outcomes means giving up on goals. This misunderstanding is keeping you trapped in emotional reactivity instead of strategic thinking. This confusion is keeping you weak when you could be powerful. Here's what detachment actually means. You care about the outcome, but you're not controlled by your need for a specific outcome. You're invested in the process, but you're not devastated if the process doesn't lead where you expected. You want things to work out, but you're not dependent on them working out exactly as you planned. You maintain emotional stability regardless of external results. Think about the last time you were desperately attached to something. Maybe it was a job opportunity, a romantic relationship, or a business deal. How did that desperation affect your performance? Did your neediness make you more attractive to the other party, or did it make you seem weak and manipulable? Did your attachment to the outcome improve your decision-making, or did it cloud your judgment with emotion? The psychology of detachment is counterintuitive but undeniable. When you need something desperately, you repel it. When you're attached to a specific outcome, you sabotage your chances of achieving it. When you're emotionally dependent on other people's responses, you give them the power to manipulate your emotional state. When you can't let go, you can't move forward. But when you develop genuine detachment, everything changes. You make decisions based on logic instead of fear. You negotiate from a position of strength instead of desperation. You communicate with confidence instead of neediness. You take risks because you're not afraid of failure. You pursue opportunities because you're not paralyzed by the possibility of rejection. Here's how this works in real situations. You're in a salary negotiation, and you're genuinely prepared to walk away if the terms aren't acceptable. This detachment from the outcome gives you negotiating power. You can make reasonable demands because you're not desperate for their acceptance. You can hold firm on important points because you're not afraid of losing the opportunity. You're dating someone, and you're genuinely fine with being single if the relationship doesn't develop naturally. This detachment from romantic outcomes makes you more attractive. You're not clingy, needy, or desperate for their validation. You're a complete person who would enjoy their company, but doesn't require it for your happiness. This independence is magnetic. You're building a business and you're genuinely prepared for the possibility of failure. This detachment from guaranteed success allows you to take calculated risks. You're not paralyzed by fear because you've already accepted the worst-case scenario. You can move boldly because you're not controlled by your attachment to security. The most powerful people understand this principle instinctively. They care deeply about their goals, but they're not emotionally dependent on achieving every specific goal. They invest heavily in relationships, but they're not desperate for any particular person's approval. They work hard for success, but they're not destroyed by temporary failures or setbacks. This detachment gives them several crucial advantages. First, they make better decisions because their thinking isn't clouded by emotional desperation. Second, they're more attractive to other people because neediness repels while independence attracts. Third, they're harder to manipulate because they're not controlled by their fears. Fourth, they're more resilient because they've already accepted uncertainty as part of life. But developing real detachment requires you to confront your deepest fears. You have to face the possibility that you might not get the job you want. You have to accept that the relationship might not work out. You have to acknowledge that your business might fail. You have to embrace the reality that other people might not approve of your choices. This isn't about becoming pessimistic or expecting the worst. This is about becoming psychologically prepared for any outcome. This is about building emotional resilience that allows you to pursue your goals without being controlled by your need to achieve them. This is about creating inner stability that doesn't depend on external circumstances. Start practicing detachment in low-stakes situations. Send an email without obsessing over the response. Request without being attached to getting a yes. Share an opinion without needing agreement. Apply for opportunities without being desperate for acceptance. Notice how your effectiveness increases when your emotions aren't riding on the outcome. The goal is to become someone who pursues what they want without being controlled by their wanting. Someone who cares about outcomes without being enslaved by their caring. Someone who invests in relationships without being dependent on other people's responses. Someone who takes risks without being paralyzed by the possibility of failure. When you achieve genuine detachment, you become untouchable. Not because you don't care, but because your caring doesn't control you. Not because you don't want things, but because your wanting doesn't make you desperate. Not because you don't have feelings, but because your feelings don't dictate your decisions. This is the power that comes from emotional freedom. This is the strength that comes from internal independence. Lesson 4. Silent leverage. You think power is loud. You believe influence requires force. You assume that getting what you want means pushing, demanding, and making noise. But the most dangerous people in any room are the quietest ones. The most powerful moves happen in silence. The most effective leverage is applied so subtly that the other person doesn't even realize they're being influenced. Right now, you're probably trying to win through volume instead of strategy. You're arguing when you should be positioning. You're demanding when you should be maneuvering. You're fighting battles when you should be winning wars. This approach makes you look desperate and feel frustrated because you're using force when you should be using finesse. Watch how amateurs handle conflict versus how professionals handle conflict. Amateurs raise their voices, make threats, and try to overpower the opposition. Professionals lower their voices, gather information, and position themselves advantageously. Amateurs want immediate compliance. Professionals want an inevitable victory. Amateurs play checkers. Professionals play chess. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote, "The best fortress which a prince can possess is the affection of the people." Notice he didn't say the best fortress is the strongest army or the most weapons. The best fortress is an influence so subtle and complete that people want to protect your interests because they believe your interests align with theirs. But you're addicted to immediate results. You want people to change their minds right now. You want situations to resolve immediately. You want conflicts to end today. This impatience is destroying your effectiveness. This need for instant gratification is preventing you from building the kind of deep, sustainable influence that actually changes things. Here's what silent leverage looks like in practice. You want a promotion, but instead of demanding it directly, you start positioning yourself as indispensable. You take on projects that make you crucial to important outcomes. You develop skills that make you difficult to replace. You build relationships that make you valuable to key decision makers. When promotion time comes, the choice is obvious. You've made yourself the logical selection without ever having to ask. You're in a disagreement with someone, but instead of arguing your position, you start asking questions that lead them to your conclusion. You don't tell them they're wrong. You help them discover the problems with their approach. You don't present your solution. You guide them toward recognizing your solution as the obvious choice. They end up changing their mind while thinking it was their idea. You want someone to do something for you, but instead of making direct requests, you create situations where helping you benefits them. You don't ask for favors. You create opportunities for mutual benefit. You don't make demands. You make it easy and rewarding for them to choose to help you. They end up wanting to do what you wanted them to do. The psychology behind silent leverage is fundamental to human nature. People resist being told what to do, but they embrace ideas they think they discovered themselves. People reject being pushed, but they welcome being gently guided. People hate feeling manipulated, but they love feeling smart and autonomous. Silent leverage works with human psychology instead of against it. This requires you to think several moves ahead instead of just focusing on the next move. You have to consider not just what you want to happen, but how to make other people want it to happen too. You have to think about not just your immediate goals, but the long-term positioning that makes your goals inevitable. You have to focus not just on winning this conversation, but on setting up conditions for winning the overall game. But silent leverage isn't about being sneaky or deceptive. It's about being strategic and patient. It's about understanding that lasting influence is built through consistent positioning rather than forceful demands. It's about recognizing that people need to feel like they're making their own choices, even when you're influencing those choices. The Most successful people rarely have to ask for what they want directly because they've positioned themselves so that what they want becomes the obvious choice for everyone involved. They don't have to convince people because they've created circumstances where people convince themselves. They don't have to apply pressure because they've built systems where the pressure comes from the situation itself. This works in every area of life. In business, instead of demanding better terms, you make yourself so valuable that better terms become necessary to keep you. In relationships, instead of asking for more attention, you become so interesting that attention flows naturally toward you. In negotiations, instead of making ultimatums, you create conditions where your preferred outcome serves everyone's interests. Start developing your silent leverage immediately. Instead of trying to force immediate changes, start positioning for long-term influence. Instead of arguing your points directly, start asking questions that lead others toward your conclusions. Instead of making demands, start creating situations where what you want becomes what others want too. The key is patience combined with strategic thinking. You have to be willing to invest time in positioning instead of demanding immediate results. You have to be comfortable with influence that works slowly but lasts permanently. You have to trust that subtle pressure applied consistently is more effective than intense pressure applied sporadically. Watch how this transforms your relationships and your results. Notice how people respond differently when they feel like they're making their own choices versus when they feel like you're trying to control them. Pay attention to how much more cooperation you get when you make it easy and beneficial for people to do what you want them to do. Silent leverage turns you from someone who has to fight for every small victory into someone who wins naturally. Because you've set up the game in your favor, it transforms you from someone who has to convince people into someone who creates conditions where people convince themselves. This is how you become untouchable, not through force but through positioning, not through volume but through strategy, not through demands but through inevitable influence. Lesson 5. Mirror of the mind. You're talking to people about what you want them to know instead of reflecting what they need to feel. You're presenting information instead of providing understanding. You're sharing your perspective instead of demonstrating that you see their perspective. This approach makes every conversation about you when the most powerful conversations are about them. Right now, you're probably trying to impress people with your knowledge, your achievements, or your opinions. You walk into conversations ready to share your insights, your experiences, your solutions. But here's what actually creates influence: making other people feel seen, understood, and validated. When you mirror their inner world back to them, they experience a connection so powerful that they become naturally drawn to you. Think about the last conversation that made you feel truly understood. Was it because the other person shared impressive information about themselves? Or was it because they demonstrated a deep understanding of your situation, your feelings, your challenges? Was it because they had great advice? Or because they showed they really grasped what you were experiencing? The conversations that impact us most are the ones where we feel truly seen by another person. Machiavelli wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can feel. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." But when you mirror someone's mind, you reverse this dynamic. You make them feel that you experience what they really are, not just see what they appear to be. This creates a bond that superficial interactions cannot match. But you're afraid this approach is manipulative. You worry that reflecting people's thoughts and feelings to them is somehow dishonest or calculating. You think that focusing on understanding them instead of impressing them makes you seem less important. This thinking is keeping you from developing one of the most powerful influence skills available to human beings. Here's how mirroring the mind actually works. You're talking to someone who's frustrated with their job, and instead of sharing your own career advice, you reflect their frustration to them. It sounds like you're feeling trapped between wanting security and wanting fulfillment. That tension must be exhausting. They immediately feel understood because you've articulated something they've been struggling to express. You're listening to someone describe a relationship problem, and instead of offering solutions, you mirror their emotional experience. You're caught between caring about them and feeling like your caring isn't appreciated. That's a painful place to be. They feel a connection with you because you've shown that you understand not just their situation, but their emotional reality. You're in a business meeting with someone resistant to change, and instead of pushing your proposal, you reflect their concerns. You've built something that works, and change feels like risking what you've already achieved. That's a legitimate concern. They become more open to your ideas because you've demonstrated that you understand their perspective instead of dismissing it. The psychology behind this is profound. When people feel understood, their defensive barriers come down. When their inner experience is accurately reflected to them, they experience a form of psychological relief. When someone demonstrates that they truly see their situation, they become naturally inclined to trust that person's perspective and guidance. But mirroring the mind goes deeper than just reflecting surface-level emotions. This is about understanding the underlying fears, desires, conflicts, and motivations that drive someone's behavior. This is about seeing the human being behind the position they're taking. This is about recognizing the emotional logic that makes their choices make sense to them. You start by listening for what they're not saying as much as what they are saying. You pay attention to the emotions behind their words. You notice the tensions and contradictions in their situation. You look for the deeper needs that their surface-level requests are trying to meet. You become a psychological detective who solves the mystery of what someone really needs to feel understood. This skill transforms every relationship you have. In professional settings, you become someone people want to work with because you make them feel heard and valued. In personal relationships, you become someone people trust with their deepest concerns because you demonstrate genuine understanding. In negotiations, you become someone people want to find solutions with because you acknowledge their legitimate interests. But mastering this requires you to overcome your natural self-focus. You have to resist the urge to share your own similar experiences. You have to avoid the temptation to offer immediate solutions. You have to suppress the impulse to prove how much you know. Instead, you have to become genuinely curious about their inner world and committed to understanding it accurately. The most influential people are not the ones with the most impressive stories. They're the ones who make other people feel most understood. They don't win people over by being fascinating. They win people over by being fascinated by others. They don't create a connection by being interesting. They create a connection by being genuinely interested. Start practicing this immediately. In your next conversation, resist the urge to share your perspective until you've demonstrated that you understand theirs. Instead of offering advice, reflect on what you're hearing. Instead of sharing your experience, explore theirs. Instead of presenting solutions, acknowledge their challenges. Watch how people respond when they feel truly seen by you. Notice how their body language changes when you accurately mirror their inner experience. Pay attention to how much more open they become when you show understanding, before seeking to be understood. Observe how naturally they want to hear your perspective after you've demonstrated that you genuinely grasp theirs. This isn't about becoming a therapist or losing yourself in other people's problems. This is about developing the psychological intelligence to understand what makes people feel connected, valued, and understood. This is about recognizing that influence flows toward people who make others feel psychologically safe and emotionally validated. When you master the mirror of the mind, you become someone people seek out when they need to process important decisions. You become someone people trust with sensitive information because you've shown you understand the complexity of their situation. You become someone people want to please because you've made them feel genuinely appreciated for who they are, not just what they can do. This is how you become untouchable in relationships, not by being impressive, but by being understanding, not by being fascinating, but by making others feel fascinating, not by showing how much you know, but by showing how much you care to understand. The mirror of the mind transforms you from someone people tolerate into someone people treasure. Lesson 6. Beyond good and evil, you're paralyzed by moral absolutes that don't exist in the real world. You're making decisions based on what should be right instead of what actually works. You're limiting your options because you're afraid of being judged by people who don't understand the game you're playing. This moral rigidity is keeping you weak while more flexible people achieve the results you want but won't pursue. Right now, you're probably operating under the illusion that good intentions guarantee good outcomes. You believe that playing by the rules means the rules will protect you. You assume that being ethical according to your personal moral code will somehow make the world treat you ethically in return. But the brutal truth is that results don't care about your moral comfort zone. Outcomes don't respect your ethical boundaries. Success doesn't wait for your permission to be morally complicated. Every day, someone is getting ahead of you because they're willing to operate in gray areas where you won't go. They're making deals you wouldn't make, having conversations you wouldn't have, and taking actions you wouldn't take. Not because they're evil, but because they understand that the world doesn't operate according to simple moral categories. They've learned to think beyond good and evil. Machiavelli wrote, "Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved." This isn't a celebration of cruelty. This is a recognition that moral idealism often conflicts with practical effectiveness. This is an acknowledgement that the results you want sometimes require methods that make you uncomfortable, but you're terrified of being seen as manipulative, selfish, or ruthless. You'd rather fail with clean hands than succeed with dirty ones. You'd rather lose while maintaining your moral purity than win by compromising your ethical standards. This thinking feels noble, but it's actually a form of self-righteousness that keeps you ineffective while you watch less morally rigid people achieve your goals. Here's what operating beyond good and evil actually means. You're negotiating a business deal, and you realize that sharing certain information would help your position but hurt the other party. A morally absolute thinker would either share everything honestly or feel guilty about strategic disclosure. Someone thinking beyond good and evil recognizes that negotiation inherently involves information asymmetry, and they focus on achieving the best outcome for their interests while still operating within legal and professional boundaries. You're managing a team, and you have to choose between being liked and being effective. A person trapped in moral absolutes would try to be both, probably achieving neither. Someone operating beyond good and evil understands that leadership sometimes requires making unpopular decisions for better long-term outcomes. They choose effectiveness over popularity because they understand that results serve everyone better than good intentions. You're in a social situation where being completely honest would damage relationships unnecessarily, but being strategic with the truth would preserve important connections. A morally rigid person would either blurt out hurtful honesty or feel guilty about tactful communication. Someone thinking beyond good and evil recognizes that social harmony sometimes requires diplomatic truth-telling rather than brutal transparency. The psychology behind this is crucial to understand. Moral absolutism often serves your ego more than it serves your actual values. It makes you feel superior to people who make harder choices. It protects you from the discomfort of moral ambiguity. It allows you to avoid taking responsibility for complex decisions by hiding behind simple rules. But it also keeps you ineffective in a world that doesn't respect simple rules. Real ethical thinking is more sophisticated than following predetermined moral categories. It involves weighing competing values, considering long-term consequences, and making nuanced decisions based on specific contexts. It means recognizing that sometimes being kind in the short term is cruel in the long term. Sometimes being harsh immediately is more loving ultimately. Sometimes protecting one person's interest requires disappointing another person's expectations. The most successful people aren't the most moral, according to simple definitions. They're the most thoughtful about complex moral situations. They don't follow rigid ethical rules. They develop sophisticated ethical reasoning that allows them to pursue their goals while still maintaining their core values. They understand that moral purity is often the enemy of moral effectiveness. This doesn't mean abandoning your values or becoming a sociopath. This means developing more sophisticated thinking about how to live your values in a complex world. This means recognizing that moral idealism without practical effectiveness often serves no one well. This means understanding that you can maintain your integrity while still playing the game strategically. The people who achieve significant results rarely get there by following simple moral formulas. They get there by making difficult decisions that serve their long-term values, even when those decisions feel uncomfortable in the moment. They prioritize outcomes over comfort. They choose effectiveness over moral simplicity. They operate beyond good and evil. Start examining your moral rigidities right now. Where are you limiting your options because you're afraid of moral complexity? Where are you choosing comfort over effectiveness? Where are you letting moral absolutism prevent you from achieving results that would actually serve your values better? Where are you using ethical purity as an excuse for avoiding difficult decisions? The goal isn't to become amoral. The goal is to become more morally sophisticated. The goal isn't to abandon your values. The goal is to serve your values more effectively by thinking more complexly about how to implement them. The goal isn't to become evil. The goal is to stop being paralyzed by oversimplified ideas about good and evil. When you learn to operate beyond good and evil, you become someone who achieves results that serve your deeper values instead of someone who maintains surface-level moral purity while accomplishing nothing meaningful. You become someone who makes hard choices for better outcomes instead of someone who makes easy choices for comfortable feelings. You become someone who understands that the world is complex and responds with sophisticated thinking instead of simple formulas. This is how you become untouchable, not by being evil, but by being too sophisticated for simple moral categories, not by abandoning ethics, but by developing ethics complex enough to handle real-world situations, not by becoming ruthless, but by becoming effective enough to actually achieve the results your values demand. Lesson 7. Strategic exposure. You're giving away your power through information hemorrhaging. You're sharing your thoughts, your plans, your struggles, your victories, your fears, and your hopes with anyone who will listen. You think this transparency builds trust and creates connection, but it's actually destroying your influence and eliminating your mystique. Every unnecessary detail you reveal is ammunition someone else can use against you. Right now, you're probably oversharing because you've been taught that authenticity requires complete transparency. You believe that being genuine means being an open book. You think that building relationships requires revealing everything about yourself. But here's the brutal truth. The most powerful people are strategic about what they share, when they share it, and with whom they share it. Think about the people you respect most. Do you respect them because they tell you everything about their lives, or because they maintain a certain dignity and mystique? Do you find them compelling because they overshare their problems, or because they handle their challenges with grace and discretion? Do you seek their advice because they reveal all their struggles, or because they demonstrate competence through selective disclosure? Machiavelli understood this when he wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." The key is controlling what people see. The power is in managing your appearance through strategic choices about what to reveal and what to keep private. This isn't about being fake. This is about being strategic with your authenticity. But you're afraid that being selective with information makes you secretive or manipulative. You worry that not sharing everything means you're being dishonest. You think that strategic exposure somehow compromises your integrity. This thinking is keeping you weak when you could be powerful, forgettable when you could be magnetic, ordinary when you could be extraordinary. Here's how strategic exposure works in practice. You achieve a significant victory, but instead of immediately sharing all the details with everyone, you mention it selectively to people who can benefit from knowing about your success. You don't hide your achievement, but you don't broadcast every aspect of how you achieved it. You maintain the impact while preserving the intrigue. You're facing a challenge, but instead of sharing your stress and uncertainty with everyone who asks, you handle it privately while projecting calm competence publicly. You don't pretend everything is perfect, but you don't make your problems everyone else's business. You maintain your reputation for reliability while dealing with difficulties strategically. You have plans, but instead of announcing every detail to anyone curious, you share your vision selectively with people who can support or contribute to your goals. You don't hide your ambitions, but you don't give away information that others could use to undermine or compete with your efforts. You maintain momentum while protecting your strategy. The psychology behind strategic exposure is fundamental to influence and attraction. Mystery creates interest. Predictability creates boredom. When people know everything about you, they stop paying attention to you. When they have to wonder about certain aspects of your life, they stay engaged with you. When you're an open book, you become background noise. When you're strategically mysterious, you become magnetic. But strategic exposure isn't about being secretive for the sake of being secretive. It's about understanding that information is power, and giving away power carelessly is self-sabotage. It's about recognizing that not everything needs to be shared with everyone. It's about developing the wisdom to know what serves your interest to reveal and what serves your interest to keep private. The most influential people understand this instinctively. They share their successes in ways that build their reputation without revealing their strategies. They discuss their challenges in ways that demonstrate resilience without showing vulnerability that can be exploited. They talk about their goals in ways that create excitement without giving away competitive advantages. This skill is crucial in every area of life. In your career, you want to be known for your results without revealing all the methods that produce those results. In relationships, you want to be known for your depth without exposing every insecurity or concern. In business, you want to be known for your vision without giving away proprietary information that competitors could use. But mastering strategic exposure requires you to think before you speak. You have to consider not just what you want to communicate, but what the person hearing your communication might do with that information. You have to think about not just the immediate conversation, but how that information might be used in future situations. You have to develop the habit of asking yourself, does sharing this serve my interests? This doesn't mean becoming paranoid or distrustful. This means becoming thoughtful about information sharing. This means developing the social intelligence to recognize that different people deserve different levels of access to your inner world. This means understanding that privacy isn't secrecy, and discretion isn't dishonesty. Start practicing strategic exposure immediately. Before sharing information about yourself, ask whether doing so serves your interests or just satisfies your impulse to be transparent. Before revealing details about your plans, consider whether those details help you achieve your goals or just make you feel more connected to the person you're talking to. Before discussing your challenges, think about whether doing so builds respect for your resilience or just makes you seem less capable. The goal is to become someone whose communications are always purposeful. Someone who shares what enhances their position and keeps private what could be used against them. Someone who maintains intrigue while building trust. Someone authentic without being an information vending machine. When you master strategic exposure, you become someone people want to know more about instead of someone people think they already understand completely. You become someone whose words carry weight. They're carefully chosen instead of someone whose words are ignored because they're constantly flowing. You become someone who controls their narrative instead of someone whose story is told by others based on the information you've carelessly shared. This is how you become untouchable. Not by hiding who you are, but by being strategic about how you reveal who you are. Not by being secretive, but by being selective. Not by being dishonest, but by being disciplined about what you share and why you share it. Strategic exposure transforms you from someone who gives away their power through oversharing into someone who builds their power through thoughtful communication. Lesson 8. Obsessed with outcomes. You're wasting your energy on arguments, validation, and being right instead of focusing on results that actually matter. You're getting distracted by how people perceive your methods instead of measuring the effectiveness of your outcomes. You're pursuing moral victories instead of practical victories. This misplaced focus is keeping you busy, but not making you successful. Right now, you're probably engaging in conversations that make you feel good, but don't change anything meaningful. You're having debates that stroke your ego, but don't advance your goals. You're seeking approval for your approach instead of measuring the results your approach produces. You're more concerned with being understood than being effective. This is the thinking pattern that keeps people perpetually frustrated while watching more outcome-focused people achieve the results they want. Think about the last argument you won. How did winning that argument improve your life? What concrete results did being right produce for you? How did proving your point advance your actual goals? If you're honest, most of the arguments you win are victories that don't translate into outcomes that matter. You feel temporarily satisfied, but nothing meaningful changes in your favor. Machiavelli wrote, "The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present." This isn't advocating dishonesty. This is recognizing that outcomes matter more than consistency. This is understanding that being rigidly committed to your previous positions can prevent you from achieving your current objectives. Results require flexibility that moral absolutism prohibits. But you're addicted to being right more than being successful. You'd rather win an argument than accomplish your goal. You'd rather have people understand your perspective than achieve the outcome you're supposedly pursuing. You'd rather maintain your principles than adapt your approach to get better results. This rightness addiction is keeping you ineffective while making you feel intellectually superior. Here's what outcome obsession looks like in practice. You're in a negotiation, and the other party comments that you could argue with or ignore. An argument-focused person would engage with the comment to prove their point. An outcome-focused person would ignore the comment if engaging with it doesn't move them closer to their negotiation goal. They care more about getting the deal they want than being right about every detail. You're managing a team member who's using methods you wouldn't use, but they're producing excellent results. A validation-seeking manager would correct their methods to feel more in control. An outcome-obsessed manager would let them continue with their effective methods while focusing on maintaining and improving the results. They care more about team performance than having everyone do things their way. You're in a social situation where someone misunderstands your position on a topic you care about. A rightness-addicted person would spend energy correcting the misunderstanding to feel properly understood. An outcome-focused person would ask themselves whether correcting this misunderstanding serves any goal they're trying to achieve in this relationship. If not, they'd let it go and focus on interactions that do advance their objectives. The psychology behind outcome obsession is powerful but difficult to develop because it requires you to sacrifice immediate emotional satisfaction for long-term practical results. Being right feels good immediately. Getting what you want often requires tolerating feeling misunderstood, unappreciated, or temporarily defeated. Most people aren't willing to make this trade-off, which is why most people don't achieve the results they claim to want. But becoming outcome-obsessed doesn't mean abandoning your values or becoming unprincipled. It means becoming more sophisticated about which battles serve your war and which battles are just ego distractions. It means developing the discipline to focus your energy on actions that produce results instead of actions that produce feelings. It means caring more about what happens than how you feel about what happens. The most successful people rarely engage in arguments that don't advance their goals. They rarely seek validation that doesn't improve their position. They rarely waste time being right about things that don't matter. They develop laser focus on outcomes that move their life forward. And they ignore everything else as noise and distraction. This requires you to constantly ask yourself, does this conversation, this argument, this need to be understood, this desire to correct someone's misconception actually help me achieve what I'm trying to achieve? If the answer is no, you disengage and redirect your energy toward activities that do serve your objectives. But outcome obsession goes deeper than just avoiding pointless arguments. This is about measuring everything you do by the results it produces instead of by how it makes you feel or how it makes you look. This is about becoming ruthlessly honest about whether your actions are actually moving you toward your goals or just making you feel busy and important. You start tracking your actual results instead of your activity levels. You measure your progress toward specific objectives instead of how hard you're working. You evaluate your strategies based on their effectiveness instead of their moral purity or social acceptability. You become someone who achieves things instead of someone who tries to achieve things. The people who get what they want are obsessed with getting what they want. They don't get distracted by being right, being understood, being appreciated, or being validated. They focus relentlessly on producing the outcomes they've decided are important, and they're willing to sacrifice ego satisfaction to achieve practical satisfaction. Start developing outcome obsession immediately. Before engaging in any argument, ask yourself what outcome you're trying to achieve and whether this argument serves that outcome. Before seeking validation or understanding, ask yourself whether getting that validation moves you closer to your goals. Before correcting someone's misconception about you, ask yourself whether being properly understood by this person actually matters for anything you're trying to accomplish. The goal is to become someone whose energy is always directed toward producing results that matter, instead of winning victories that don't matter. Someone who measures success by outcomes achieved instead of arguments won. Someone who focuses on effectiveness instead of righteousness. Someone who gets what they want instead of just feeling good about wanting it. When you become truly outcome-obsessed, you stop wasting time on activities that don't produce the results you want. You stop getting distracted by emotional satisfaction that doesn't translate into practical progress. You stop engaging with people and situations in ways that make you feel good, but don't make your life better. You become laser-focused on what actually works to achieve what you actually want. This is how you become untouchable, not by being right about everything, but by being effective at achieving what matters. Not by winning every argument, but by accomplishing every goal. Not by being understood by everyone, but by getting results that speak for themselves. Outcome obsession transforms you from someone who talks about what they want into someone who gets what they want. You walked into this with the mindset of someone who hoped the world would treat you fairly. You're leaving with the psychological weapons of someone who makes fairness irrelevant. You started believing that being good automatically leads to good outcomes. You're finishing with the understanding that strategic thinking leads to the outcomes you actually want. These 7 lessons aren't just concepts to consider. They're transformative practices that separate the influential from the influenced, the powerful from the powerless, the untouchable from the expendable. When you implement calculated mystery, You become someone people want to understand instead of someone people think they already know. When you master adaptive masks, you become effective in every environment instead of being limited to narrow contexts. When you develop true detachment, you break free from the emotional chains that keep other people controlled by their circumstances. When you apply silent leverage, you influence outcomes without the resistance that comes from using force. When you perfect the mirror of the mind, you become someone people trust with their deepest concerns instead of someone they tolerate in casual conversation. When you operate beyond good and evil, you achieve results that serve your values instead of maintaining moral purity that serves no one. When you practice strategic exposure, you control your narrative instead of letting others define your story through the information you carelessly share. When you become obsessed with outcomes, you accomplish goals instead of just talking about them. But here's what matters most. You now understand that power isn't given to the deserving. It's taken by those who understand how influence actually works. You now recognize that the world doesn't reward good intentions. It rewards effective strategies. You now see that being untouchable isn't about being perfect. It's about being psychologically sophisticated enough to navigate human nature without being controlled by it. The person you were when you started listening to this would have been shocked by some of these ideas. They would have worried about the ethics of strategic thinking. They would have been concerned about the morality of influence techniques. They would have preferred comfort to effectiveness. But that person was also probably frustrated by their inability to get the results they wanted while watching less scrupulous people achieve those results easily. The person you're becoming understands that moral idealism without practical effectiveness serves no one well. You understand that being strategically minded doesn't make you evil, it makes you competent. You understand that influence techniques aren't manipulation when they're used to achieve outcomes that serve everyone's legitimate interests. You've evolved from someone who hoped for the best to someone who engineers the best. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. These lessons require practice, refinement, and integration into your daily interactions. But every time you choose calculated mystery over oversharing, you become more magnetic. Every time you adapt your approach to your environment, you become more effective. Every time you detach from outcomes while working toward them, you become more powerful. Every time you use silent leverage instead of force, you achieve better results with less resistance. Every time you mirror someone's mind instead of trying to impress them with yours, you build deeper influence. Every time you choose effectiveness over moral simplicity, you get closer to outcomes that actually serve your values. Every time you practice strategic exposure, you build your mystique while protecting your interests. Every time you focus on outcomes instead of arguments, you accomplish more while arguing less. If these lessons have opened your eyes to how influence actually works in the real world, drop this affirmation in the comments. I am becoming strategically untouchable. Let me know that you understand the difference between hoping for respect and commanding it. Show me that you're ready to stop being a victim of other people's psychological strategies and start being the architect of your own influence. If this content has shifted your perspective from idealistic to strategic, hit that like button and subscribe for more insights that transform how you think about power, influence, and human nature. Don't just consume this information. Implement it. Practice it, master it, become it. Remember, the world belongs to those who understand how it actually works, not how they wish it worked. You now have the tools to join them. Now go become untouchable.